Hello and good evening. Thank you for coming back and hanging out with Ramo Retrac. I'm going to give it to you like it, like you want it, and you got to have it every time, right on time. Like and subscribe. I'm gonna get on out the way. We about to get smarter. We about to get wiser. We about to grow. We about to go to another level. We about to raise our frequency. Take the 1,000 subscriber challenge with me. By the time I get to 1,000 subscribers, if you consistently listen to my videos, I'm going to change you as a person. Slap me right on the back of my neck with those $2 donations. I love those $2 donations. They starting to pay for some gas around here. Slap your boy right across the back of my head with that $2 donation. Look down in the description box. You can find my Cash App right there. You ready to rock? You ready to grow? Let's go. Let's do it once again. I enjoy doing these videos so much because you know what? I'm growing too. I'm learning too. And you can imagine, look at all the videos that I put up. Man, like a superhuman now. And I want you guys to feel free to go back and binge watch my page. You're gonna laugh and you're gonna have some fun. Let's get into it.
How can it not be, though?
That's the weird thing. Yeah.
Does that mean that whatever is real, and we should probably give people your headset metaverse explanation, which speaks dear to my heart. But before we do that, does that mean that whatever is real is non-physical?
Well, so the word real is a little slippery. So in some sense, my headache is real, right? Because it's a real experience. Mm. But it real in the sense that the physicists are talking about it when they thought that space and time were fundamental. They were thinking that this was the ground of all, like in a Newtonian universe, and even in Einstein. Einstein thought that space and time was the grounding reality for everything. And now we realize that the 4 dimensions of space-time, or even 10 dimensions of string theory or something like that, is not going deep enough. There are structures entirely beyond space-time and entirely beyond quantum theory. So these new structures are not like little structures sitting inside at the small scales of space-time.
I don't think we get the structures yet. People are going to be super lost. So
okay.
The idea of the headset, I think, is a really core concept. So somebody asked you once, like, in the future, we're going to start using different metaphors. What metaphors do you think we're going to use? And you said the metaverse. As somebody trying to contribute to the metaverse, my ears perked up on that one.
Right.
Why will that become such a useful metaphor for this moment and how we perceive things?
Right. Because the way that evolution speaks on this is it says that our perceptions of objects in space and time is really just like a virtual reality headset. It's there to help you play the game of life without knowing what's on the other side of the headset, what's on the other side, what's the hardware and software that's running the game. You don't have to know that to play the game. And in fact, if you were trying to play a game of like Grand Theft Auto in virtual reality, and you had to toggle millions of voltages per second to drive your car, you would lose when you were competing with someone who could just turn a nice little simple steering wheel and press on a artificial gas pedal. So evolution gave us senses that allow us to survive by hiding the truth and just telling us how to act. So as the evolutionary theorists would say, our senses guide adaptive behavior.
Why does natural selection as a theory predict that? Because I understand the theory, I guess, well enough at a high level, but I never would have guessed that it actually says that it makes a prediction anyway that whatever is real, the only thing I can tell you that evolution has selected for is not that. So is this something that Darwin himself saw in his theory?
I think Darwin would be surprised. And in fact, many evolutionary theorists today are surprised. And
so how do we know this isn't just a kooky interpretation of natural selection by Donald Hoffman?
Exactly. So the way we pursue this, it turns out that Darwin's theory has been turned into a mathematically precise theory. It's called evolutionary game theory. So John Maynard Smith started that in the 1970s. And so we now have, instead of, Darwin's theory, which is, it's imprecise in the sense that it's not a mathematical model. Evolutionary game theory, evolutionary graph theory are mathematically precise. So we can now prove theorems, and we can ask technical questions. So what is the probability?
Since joining Forward and utilizing tips that I got from my doctor, I've dropped my cholesterol more than 50 points. My name is Gina, and I've been a Forward member for over a year. It's like going to the doctor with the Jetsons. Before, it was going to the doctor with the Flintstones. Before Forward, getting data about yourself or any of your health data was like near to impossible. After Forward, it instantly, after my appointment, everything was in the app. And I could see during my appointment that it was being input into my account as I was speaking with my doctor. It feels great to be able to have control over my health journey, to understand more about what can make an impact. I feel empowered.
That natural selection would shape the system of any organism to reveal any true structures of objective reality. That's a clean technical question. And it turns out that evolutionary game theory is precise enough to address that question.
Okay, so I know I've gotten hung up on that a lot, and I think for people of my cognitive ability, we will have to accept that as the miracle of this conversation. Otherwise, we'll derail on that, because I don't understand how his can be turned into a math equation, and I worry that for you to explain it to me would take an entire semester and cause me to tear my hair out. But so if we can accept, unless you're thinking, it looks like you may have a way to explain it.
I can give a little hint. It's when we say evolutionary game theory, think about game theory. How do you play Monopoly and win? How do you play various games? So it turns out you can look at different strategies that someone might have. I'm going to go for Park Place. I'm going to go for Boardwalk. I'm going to try to, there's all different strategies. And you can then write down mathematically, okay, if you take this strategy, what is the probability that you will do well against someone who's taking this other strategy?
It's all about most offspring?
So the strategies are ways to survive long enough to reproduce. And so you can look at different strategies for playing the game of life. So, for example, some organisms will have millions or thousands of offspring, but they don't care about the offspring. Most of them will die. But if 1% of them make it, human full of offspring, and we put a lot of effort into them. So those are different strategies, for example, in perception. Humans in our evolution on vision and hearing, and less on smell and taste and so forth. Other organisms focus on things that we don't even have, like echolocation in bats. So different organisms will take different strategies. The game of life is, how do I live long enough to reproduce? And how do I raise my offspring to maturity? Do I just make lots of them and let them fend for themselves, and most of them die, but a fraction will make it? Or do I make just a few of them and really help them for 20 or 30 years until they can go on their own?
Or more these days.
Or more of those days.
So from evolutionary game theory's perspective, what is the most successful creature on planet Earth?
Probably bacteria.
Interesting.
Right? There's a lot more bacteria than
good answer.
Than us, and maybe viruses if they're more. So from that point of view, the winner is the one who survives long enough to reproduce and reproduces for a long period of time. And cyanobacteria have been around for billions of years. So they're certainly candidates. I'm not saying that they're the final answer, but that would be, humans are relative newcomers.
And I really like the theory that humans are bacteria's way of moving around, which is pretty interesting when you think that we're outnumbered by the bacteria in our guts, on our skin, all of that stuff. It's pretty interesting. I should have guessed that answer, but I didn't. But that makes a lot of sense.
Right. So this gives you the idea of when you're playing a game, there's lots of strategies, especially in a complicated game. It's not that there's going to be one best strategy. It's rather that if Tom is using this strategy, what strategy should I use to counter Tom's strategy, and so forth. Same thing in business, right? It depends on who your competition is, what strategies you're going to take, and what is the governing system and so forth, like with the laws and so forth. That will all determine your strategy. So you can use game theory and turn it into a tool for studying evolution as a game where your bacteria are trying to play the game of life one way, humans are playing the game of life another way. Every different organism, every different plant is playing the game of life with a different kind of strategy.
That's really interesting. It's funny. This is the third time I've interviewed you, and I've never pushed on this because there was something about I couldn't wrap my brain around it. So I'm glad you took the time.
Yeah.
What's fascinating to me is every species has its own Umwelt.
Yes, right.
Which is a really fascinating concept. So I looked this up once, and every time I say this stat, I think I must be wrong because it just seems way too far off. But humans are able to perceive 0.0035% of the electromagnetic spectrum. That's so like everything that we see and think of as the world is 0.0035%. That is like vanishingly small.
Exactly right. So our window on the world is trivial compared to what could in principle be available. And so the question that you can then ask in a technical fashion is,
Sorry guys, got a little ad here. Just a second. There you go.
what is the probability that a strategy of seeing truth, structures about objective reality, would that strategy help you to survive long enough to raise kids? And so we can ask that as a technical question. Evolution has the tools to do that. And the key concept is something called a fitness payoff. So fitness payoff is like, if you're playing a game, there's a certain way that you get points in the game. If you're playing a video game, right, you have to shoot things down or avoid getting hit and to get points. And if you get enough points, you get to the next level of the game. Well, fitness payoffs, if you get enough fitness payoffs, what that corresponds to is you're surviving long enough to reproduce, and you don't go to the next level of the game, but your offspring and your DNA in your offspring go to the next level of the game. So here's the big idea. We can ask these fitness payoff functions that govern our evolution. They do depend on whatever the world is and the world structure. So they do depend on the world. They depend on the organism. What's fit for me is not fit for a benthic fish. Being 5,000 meters under the water would kill me. It's just what the benthic fish wants. So the fitness payoffs depend on the true structure of the world. It depends on the organism, Hoffman versus a fish, and the action, feeding, fighting, fleeing, and mating, and so forth. And you can then ask, what is the probability? And this is the key technical question. What is the probability that a randomly chosen fitness payoff function that's governing my evolution has information about the true structure of the world, right? Because it's that evolution tells us those fitness payoffs are what determine how your senses are going to evolve.
What's the base assumption there that that reality is so complex? In fact, I want to take a second to really elucidate the example you gave about Grand Theft Auto, which I think is so brilliant. What's actually happening in Grand Theft Auto is electrical currents are toggling on and off gates on the computer, and that somehow makes things happen on your screen that you can interact with and score points and all that.
Right.
But if you look at a chip, it is so complicated that trying to zap electrodes in the right order is literally impossible.
Right.
And so everything that we as the average non-computer programmer think of as a computer is really just the GUI. It's the interface. And so you're there at a really abstracted level. It is so abstract as to be nonsensical compared to what's actually happening at the electrical communication level with the machinery itself sending signals to your TV.
Exactly.
And if real life has that same level of complexity, then I get why it would need to be so abstracted that as to be just nonsensical compared to what reality really is. Something I think breaks in people's intuition. It certainly breaks in my intuition when I think, though, that there has to be some sort of mapping. So the example that you've said many times, which I think is really on point, is if people are going to make fun of you, they will say is, oh, you don't think any of this is real? Go ahead and step in front of that train and see if it kills you.
Right.
And of course it's going to. So the representation of the train is pointing at something that will change your state from alive to dead.
That's right.
Now, whether all of that is so, again, abstracted from what's actually happening at a electrical level, I don't even know what to liken it to. But nonetheless, stepping in front of a train will flip you from alive to dead, whatever that means in the underlying reality. So do you think at all about, like, do you care what it's mapping to, or are you just like, it doesn't matter, it's too complicated, we're not there yet?
And that's why I'm interested in this particular theorem, right? Because my interest is, I'm seeing a world of space and time and objects with colors and shapes and motions. How is that the true world? Is that the true structure of objective reality? Or is this as divorced from reality? Is what we're seeing as divorced from the fundamental reality as my Grand Theft Auto VR headset is from the voltages inside the supercomputer that's running it? Mm. That's the simple question, right? So when I talk about things outside of space-time, it's just like, suppose someone had played Grand Theft Auto since they were 1 day old, and their parents had left them in a headset their whole life. And when they're 25, the parents say, guess what? You've been in a headset your whole life. And that person probably can't even, what could possibly be outside of my headset? I've lived my whole life inside this headset. And you pull it off and you realize, oh, wow, there's a whole world that's entirely outside of what you're in. That's the question we're asking. Has evolution shaped us with just a little headset, a VR headset, that guides adaptive behavior, but shows us none of objective reality? That's the technical question. And the answer is very, very clear. The probability is 1 that we don't see the truth at all.
Meaning 100%.
100%.
Okay, so if the probability is 100% that you are seeing a very false version,
right?
The thing that seems to predict to me is that the underlying reality is so complicated that, at least in this form, I don't know how else to refer to that, in this form, it would, with our Umwelt, our ability to process data, whatever, it would not make sense to try to deal with the reality, that it's far more efficient to create an abstraction layer. But if underlying reality is dead simple, that doesn't seem like it would hold true. So do we just presume that there is extreme complexity?
Sorry guys, got another little ad here. Gonna fast forward it right now.
Well, it turns out that the extreme complexity isn't necessary for this theorem to be true.
Interesting. Why would you need such an elaborate abstraction if it isn't complicated?
Well, so it turns out when you actually just look at the math. So suppose the world has some number of states, 1 billion states, or 100 states, whatever it might be. So there's some number of states in the world. And you have some number of states of perception. I can see green, red, there's lots of things I can see. When you just do a simple count, look at all the possible functions from the states of the world, states of my perception, you just count them. So the world doesn't have to be complicated. It could have just 100 points or 1,000 points. When you count all the functions that are the fitness functions, and ask how many of those functions actually contain information about the structures in the world, it turns out that very quickly the proportion goes to 0. So even if the structure isn't that complicated, maybe there's only one structure in the world. That's all it has, like a total order. Something, 1 is less than 2 is less than 3 is less. What is the probability that total order? So the world could be very simple. It only has one simple structure, total order, and the world only has maybe 1 million states. So it's not a very complicated world. 1 million states. What is the probability that the fitness payoff functions that govern my evolution would preserve the total order information, would actually be able to tell me about the total order? And the math is quite simple, and the answer is 0.
But it has to predict something. Like So when I make the base assumption that it's because it is too complex, I want to start putting definitions to some of these words. So when you say state, let's say lights on, lights off. So we all live where Earth has two states: the sun is up, the sun is down. That's one. Temperature would be another state. Could be hot, could be cold. Barometric pressure could be high, could be low, could be wet, could be dry. Like we can just, so there's a lot of different things. And so to your point about the fish, they're dealing with massive pressures. If they were to come up where there's no pressure, they would disintegrate or not be able to move or whatever, just like we crush down to the, you know, like a tiny can. So
they would explode and we would crush.
Right, exactly. Right. So, okay, that when you say states, that's one example. Exactly. I don't understand how, if everything were static, it were one state, that we would need an abstraction layer to navigate it more effectively than somebody that sees objective reality. So now I'm going to use an example to further illustrate what I mean. I'm going to use an example you gave me the first time. You cannot imagine how many times I've quoted you on this. Okay. You said, Tom, you have to understand that objective reality isn't like, oh, here's a table and it's got this nice swirly grain pattern. It's the number of photons reflecting off of that desk and the amount of reflectivity and all that. Now, irony of ironies, as I have started working in the metaverse, you realize how complicated the visual world is. The 0.0035% of the visual spectrum that we actually see is insanely complicated to replicate. Right. Donald? Right. It's the hardest thing I've done in my life. It's crazy. And I don't even have to fully understand it. I just have to guide the team that understands it. Anyway, when you said that, I was like, whoa, what reality is very different than how I experience it. So cool, complex. Right. So now I get why the math works out. Right. But if it isn't complex, so you don't seem to be struggling with this. What is it that you understand that I don't, or what is your base assumption that's different than mine, that makes it make sense to you that to achieve maximum fitness payoff, you would 100% not retain elements of reality?
Right. So first, I don't deny that I suspect that reality is very complicated. So my point
isn't necessary.
That's not necessary for this. That's right. It's just simply a counting thing. So if you look at all the functions from one set to another set, like, so I have functions for, say I have numbers 1 through 10, and that's my base set, and I'm going to map them into numbers 1 through 10. So I can map 1 to 3 and 2 to 5 and so forth. Mm-hmm. So if you just do, okay, if you think about that problem, I could probably figure out, okay, how many different functions are there, right? So you can write down all. Now you can say, okay, how many of those functions have the property that, they preserve that 1 is less than 2 is less than 3 and less than 4. How many of them scramble that order? How many preserve that order? How many scramble? How many contain information about the 1 less than 2, less than 3, less than 4? So this is called combinatorics. It's a branch of mathematics.
92% of people that set a New Year's goal fail to achieve it, which is why I've created a 90-day challenge designed specifically to ensure that you hit your goals. You really can radically transform yourself. Just click the link below to join me and the entire Impact Theory University community to kick off 2023 with the Impact 90 Challenge. Right,
anyway,
guys,
what do you guys think about that while I got this ad going?
I'm unfortunately all too aware of it.
The way I feel about it is, I think that when you are alone and focused on something, you can see that you can see glitches. When you're like when you're around a lot of people or there's a lot of entertainment going on, even if you're in nature, that much stimulation in your brain, it won't see that the matrix that we're living in has some glitches. And so like that's why a lot of people, they don't really see it, because because people are always like trying to, entertain themselves or whatever. If they're not, they sleep, right? Or they're working, right? It's one or the other. I'm in a situation where I get to really go deep. This is the first time I'm 52. This is the first time in my life that I've really not been a really social person. I was a tennis coach for 20 years. I'm a Q dog. And I'm a popular person and I had a bunch of fun. But when I started becoming a day trader, it does require you to isolate yourself somewhat and to be more focused and analytical and everything like that. And I have noticed some things. I have noticed some glitches in the matrix. You know what I mean? But you gotta be on a certain frequency to get there, and that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing with these videos. I'm not only improving myself, but I am helping the world open up, see different realms, and just vibrate higher. So anyway, let's get back to this. If another ad comes on, just remember I'm sitting here listening to this just like you. So if there's an ad that comes on, I'm gonna skip it or we wait till it's over, but it's gonna keep going.
Because of NFTs,
Yes.
which require you to understand this because you have, to your point, and maybe this is what you're saying, and so maybe I actually now I'm understanding it. Let me walk you through what we had to discover in NFTs. Okay, so you create all these traits,
right,
all these categories, I should say, and then within each category you have maybe 10 possible eyebrows that it could be, eyeball types, hairstyles, facial hair, so on and so forth. That outputs, let's say, 2 billion potential permutations.
Exactly right.
But you want to maintain a distribution in the 10,000 that you're actually going to show. So we were all trying to do the math and we're working it out. And I'm like,
hey there.
How long have we tried to get out of body? They got a bunch of ads on these things.
Do you wish there was an easier way?
There's no way it's as simple. There's some problem. And then we showed it to physicists and they fell out laughing and they're like, yeah, it's not that simple. And so they're like, for you to maintain the percentage likelihood to get gold eyes, let's say, out of your 2 billion combinations, they're like, you have to force it down into this thing, which they call the combinatorial or whatever. And so I was like, okay.
And so that really is the point here, that even though I agree with you that the universe is probably, the real universe, whatever it is very complicated. I believe that. Combinatorics blow up so quickly.
Got it.
By the time you just get to a few hundred elements, that, as you found, the explosion of possibilities is so great that when I ask how many of those possible fitness functions would actually be so special that they contain information about the structure of where they came from, out of all of the possible fitness functions that.
So it's not an overly complicated world. It's just the number of potential mapping points and combinations.
Exactly right.
Very interesting.
Because evolutionary theory puts no restriction on the fitness payoff functions. Any possible.
And there could be as many as you can imagine.
And there's no restrictions. There's no restriction that says they have to show you the truth. That's not part of the theory.
Right.
So and by the way, no one knows how to put that into the theory, right? So I mean, to say that it requires that only the fitness functions that preserve the truth would be a major revision to evolutionary theory. It would be unrecognizable. So when you look then and say, okay, every fitness payoff function is equal likely as any other fitness payoff function. They're all on equal footing. And then you count the ones that actually have information about the truth. They go to zero probability in fast order. Now, there is one I should bring out. There's a group at Yale that has recently published a paper that's trying to push back on this. And what they say is if you have, say, a bunch of, like thousands of fitness payoff functions, they're all radically different. Then they say that you'll be forced to go to the truth. And the argument that they make is that if our high-level cognitions, our beliefs, our goals, and so forth, are not going to interfere with our perceptions, they claim that then our perceptions have to have a single mapping from the state of the world into the state of our senses. It has to be a single mapping. You can't have more. So, because one thing I could do with a lot of fitness functions is say, well, this fitness function is different from that one, so I will do this kind of mapping from the world into my senses with this fitness payoff function. Then I'll do another mapping with this fitness payoff function. And they say, if you're going to have what we call cognitive impenetrability, so what you believe cognitively cannot affect what you see. Okay, that's the argument. Then you must have only one mapping. Well, so that's their assumption.
So hold on, let me make sure I understand that. So
Sure.
they're saying that basically so that your delusions don't create the exterior world, or at least your perception of it, you have to have this mapping so that you're actually detecting and seeing what is real.
They're saying that if what you believe doesn't affect your senses in a fundamental way,
Yep.
then they claim that entails that you can only have one mapping from the world, the fitness, the mapping of your senses, whatever the world is, into what you're seeing, the colors and the shapes and so forth. There can only be one map that holds regardless of what the fitness payoff function is. That was their claim. So, and the only reason I bring this up is because this is a recently published paper. The claim is false. It's trivial to show counterexamples. Their fundamental claim is false.
Please do, as a way just to make sure that I actually understand what they're saying, because this sounds like what they're trying to protect against is hallucinations basically becoming subjectively real.
Right. So I actually think that it's true, probably to a large extent, that what we believe does not really affect fundamentally what we see. So technical term we use, the geek term, is cognitive impenetrability of perception. That's what the philosophers of science will talk about, and cognoscientists that are and you can think about, scientists might like this because they'll say, look, we want to use our senses in our experiments. My theory makes a look and see if the prediction is true. Well, if my theory that I'm holding would change what I see, then science isn't going to really be objective, right? I mean, if I believe this theory and it changes how I see the data, then I might just see the data that confirms the theory and I can't escape. So that's why the philosophy of science has been very interested in this question. Are our high-level theoretical beliefs and just our beliefs as everyday people, do they get in there and somehow fundamentally affect how we see the world? And there is a sort of a way you could say the way I believe things does change my world, but they don't change like the color I see, right, or the three-dimensional structure of the cube here that I'm seeing. I mean, they might change it in some way, but not fundamentally like that. So that's the question. And so it's trivial. I mean, so when the group at Yale makes this point that if you have lots of different fitness payoff functions and you don't have your high-level beliefs interfering with the process of perception, then you can only have one map from the world into your senses. And of course, they don't prove that. They just state it without proof. And so it's trivially false. We have made counterexamples. It's very, very easy to make counterexamples. I can design a system in which I have, say, two fitness payoff functions. And I use one fitness payoff function to make one map from the world into my perceptions, use the other fitness function to make another map. And if I have a system that has no high-level beliefs, then the high-level beliefs aren't interfering with it. There's a counterexample right there. No cognitive penetration of perception, multiple maps. But then I can add beliefs and say, I know I can have beliefs there as long as they don't interfere with this mapping here. I could have two maps. Why not? So they're the guys, the group at Yale, they're brilliant experimentalists, and one of them is a really good friend of one of my collaborators. I mean, they were postdocs at MIT together and so forth. So they're brilliant experimentalists, but the fundamental assumption that they're making is just trivially false. And so then how do we see this in our perceptions? The way we see it in our perceptions is we have probably hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of fitness payoff functions that are governing our behavior. So what do we do with all that complexity? What we do is we group the fitness payoff functions into groups that are similar. And we take that and we make simple little data structures out of them. And those data structures are what we call objects. So this object is good for drinking.
What is a data structure? When you say that it's an object, meaning my mind groups it so that I can differentiate the cup from the coaster from the desk?
What I'm saying is we're making all this stuff up as a simple way to represent the fitness payoffs and how to get them. So for example, when you're playing Grand Theft Auto,
Hey guys, welcome to Forward.
Another
We're a new
little
type of doctor's
ad
office that's
skipping
providing
right on by
preventative
you.
primary.
You're playing a game. If you looked inside the supercomputer, there is no red Porsche, there is no steering wheel, there is no gas pedal. In some sense, those are what I call simple data structures. They're coding for, the gas pedal, and pushing on the gas pedal is coding for, who knows, countless millions of voltage changes happening in exactly the right sequence in the computer. I have this trivial data structure, gas pedal, push on it, that triggers this whole other thing that I don't want to know about. It's really too complicated. So that's what I mean by these simplifying data structures. My steering wheel is this simple data structure that I can use to interact with who knows how many billions or trillions of voltages and make them do exactly the right sequence in the right order.
Could I say representation instead of data structure?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay.
Data structure is a computer science term, so computer scientists would be very happy with that. But representation is perfectly good. And so the idea then is, what evolution has done from an evolutionary point of view is it takes all these fitness payoff functions that govern our survival and that we need to respect in order to play the game of life, and we organize them. So an apple is an object. It's a representation of a bunch of fitness payoffs. For example, the apple, if I'm interested in mating, apple's no good. If I'm interested in eating, great. If I'm interested in a weapon, so. I mean, I could throw it and do much damage. If I'm, so but if I have a sword for mating, no good. For eating, not really. I mean, I could use it to cut a coconut in half, but I can't eat the sword. For fighting, great, but not if you're fighting against a gun and things like that. So every object, and we can recognize, I would say, on the order of 30 or 40,000 different objects, basic kinds of objects. So what that indicates is that evolution has taken all these hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of fitness payoff functions, and it's not making one map from the world into our senses. It's making a bunch of different maps, and those different maps are what we call objects. And our high-level cognition, all it does is, I'm hungry. Okay, well, I won't be looking for tables. I won't be looking for the moon. I'll be looking for apples and bananas and things like that. Those data structures, those representations that have high fitness payoffs for the action of eating. And so visual attention, paying attention to different objects, is our way of switching from this representation of fitness payoffs to this representation of fitness payoffs as I need to be able to survive long enough to reproduce. And so that's this is sort of technical, but it's the reason I bring it out is because this is brand new. It's gotten a lot of attention from Yale, and so it's an important thing from the scientific side to really lay to rest that there's not one mapping that's required from the world into our senses by evolution, even if we assume that our beliefs don't interfere with our cognition. Our cognitions don't interfere with our perceptions. That doesn't entail that we have to have one mapping. It's just a false assumption. Once you let go of that false assumption, then you are opened up to realize that every object is just a data structure coding for a whole group of fitness payoffs. And that's how evolution deals with this.
Okay, so the reason that I find this so endlessly fascinating is the whole reason I stepped in front of the camera in the first place was I'd made a very profound change in my life, and I thought, hey, anybody can do this, but it really is about reframing the world. So recoding, coming up with new references, or seeing the cup in a different light, whatever. So it's interesting. So the idea of our beliefs don't influence our cognition or influence the mapping to the real world. It's probably only at the margins. It's pretty minor, as you said, but I think that there is a lot of difference in outcome in the game of life as we think about it in a modern context, depending on how you code things. But I've struggled with this. So at one point I was going to write a book, and I was working with a ghostwriter, and I was saying, like, it doesn't matter what's true. All that matters is that it's effective, and that the way that you view the world is moving you towards your goals. And this was like at the height of Trump. And the ghostwriter was like, yo, I'm not writing that. And she was like, you need to tell me that you don't believe in like a post-truth world. And I was like, that's interesting, because no, I don't mean just lie and make things up. But what is guiding my decision making isn't a quest for what's true. It's a quest for what works. And so as I think about fitness payoffs, I get that. I'm going to put a pin in the following for a second. When I hear you talk, it feels like you think the level of abstraction is like being in a game headset versus what the game machine is doing itself. That is so different.
Right.
And so we'll get to that in a minute, because that's what we're talking about. But even like at the layer of, okay, I've got my headset on, I'm locked in, like even there, how you can influence things by how you perceive them is interesting. And we're living in a moment where saying post-truth triggers a lot of things. I want to strip all that away, but get people to focus on, because really, really, truly in life, what you're talking about with fitness payoffs is how people should look at their own belief system of like, okay, I believe the way that I tell people to judge what is true is, what is the thing that allows you to predict the outcome of your actions? And so if I believe in gravity, that allows me to better predict how to handle this cup, right? Because if I hold it over here and let go and expect it to stay there, I'm going to be very disappointed when it crashes to the floor. And so believing in gravity, even if it's fake, is very useful. Stepping on the gas pedal, even if there really is no Porsche, even if there really is no gas pedal, if I'm in the game, like just assuming that that's how it works, even though it isn't true, it's a total abstraction, it's going to help you get towards your goal if your goal is to win that game. So all of that is very interesting. I do think that we can even take something like synesthesia, where, would you say that they're intentionally using cognition? No, but their perception is like, I don't know if you know who Dave Grohl is, but drummer for Nirvana, lead singer of Foo Fighters. And he is a synesthete of his own claim, own admission, And he said that, I forget if he sees or shapes, I think there might be shapes, and for him, and he said that's why it's so easy for him to remember songs, because they have these literal shapes.
Yes.
And so he just has to remember the sequence of the shapes and he can play the song. And that really has an impact. He's able to remember things that I wouldn't be able to remember, for instance, because his perception is being influenced by the way that his brain processes data. So for whatever reason, 2 areas of his brain trigger when he hears something, whereas in mine, only 1 triggers. And so that to me, when I, again, going back to why I find this so interesting, that to me says, hey, I don't know how much of what you're perceiving is real, but I know that there are consequences to how you categorize. So your idea of data structures is going to matter a lot. And so if you can categorize something as shapes and sound, it's going to be easier to remember. If you categorize, like for instance, the thing I'm always trying to get people to understand is,
here's some reasons why some people may not go to therapy.
Got another
Therapy is too
little
expensive.
ad for
They
you.
don't have time.
If you have what I call the only belief that matters, that you can, if you put time and energy into getting better at something, you actually will get better.
Right.
If you believe that, then you'll pursue improvement. If you don't believe that, then you won't, because it wouldn't make any sense.
Right.
So you miss out on fitness payoffs based on your cognitive assessment of how the world works.
Right.
So all of that's fascinating. Okay.
Absolutely.
And important to understand. Where
Absolutely.
my brain breaks with your thesis is how different what you perceive is and what the world is like. And I know, and this is where it gets hard, because I think you would say we don't know what's under space-time.
Right.
But what's your best guess? Like, as we strip away this layer, and this might be the time to talk about consciousness, but I don't want to lead the witness.
Right.
What do you, if it isn't space-time, stab in the dark for me. What the hell is it?
Well, I'll tell you what the physicists are doing on this, because the physicists are the ones who are saying space-time is not fundamental.
So it's there, it's a pointer, it's a representation, it's a data structure.
It's a data structure to something deeper. That's
but
right.
it happens to be the human brain, which is already a data structure. You're already making that up.
Exactly right.
But that data structure represents things through space-time.
Exactly right. Space-time is just our headset.
And it only goes down to is that the Planck, I always hear you quote a size.
Planck length is 10 to the minus 33
So
centimeters.
that is what you're quoting.
Right, exactly.
That's the smallest thing that we can measure?
Yeah, that's the smallest thing. That's the smallest scale at which space-time has any operational meaning. If you try to go smaller, space-time ceases to make any operational sense at all.
Because gravity insists that below that things have condensed to too fine of a point, it becomes a black hole?
Yeah, exactly right. You create a black hole.
Okay.
So, and if you think about it,
And we know that isn't true? Like, why can't that just be true? Smaller than that is a black hole. Yay.
well, we know we know that at the Planck scale, space-time stops and you get black holes.
So what's the problem?
Well, black hole is a singularity. It means we don't know what's happening. So you get infinities popping up.
But black holes are real, right?
They're real
As a data structure.
they're real stopping points in our understanding.
But they're in the universe.
Well, they're
I know this gets
There are
complicated
theories
because the
about
universe
what
is a
black-
representation.
oh yeah. So
That's why I want to start hating
Penrose
myself
and
for
others
based on
have been
that.
studying the properties of black holes, right?
Mhm.
Penrose won the Nobel Prize very recently for his wonderful work on black holes. And so there's a lot of work that's being done to understand the properties of black holes. For example, the amount of information you can store in a black hole doesn't depend on its volume, only the surface area.
Yeah, I don't understand that.
Yeah, right. It's very, very strange, but that turns out to be true in everyday space. The amount of information that you can store in this volume here is not dependent on the volume, it depends on the surface area. That's the universe we live on. So that's led people to this holographic kind of idea.
Oh, every word out of your mouth. I'm like, we actually are in a simulation. We haven't even talked about the non-local, things are not locally real.
Right.
We'll
right.
get to
Yeah,
that,
because that's the new Nobel Prize this year.
which is insane and literally just says you're in a simulation and it's the same as rendering. And when you look at something, it renders. When you look away, it doesn't. And we can prove it mathematically.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Way too fascinating. We'll get to that. But first, I want to understand, like, black holes, the word real gets very slippery in this conversation.
Right.
But black holes are observable.
Yes, we
So
took a
seems
picture.
consistent.
Right. So the idea is that the notion of space-time at, like, instead of 10 to the minus 33 centimeters, say 10 to the minus 40 centimeters, what would that mean? It has no meaning. There's nothing you can do with it. So black holes are fine. They're objects there that are at the end point of what space-time can do. But if we say, but I thought space-time was fundamental, that means I should be able to talk about what's happening at 10 to the minus 50 centimeters, and you just cannot. There's no operational meaning. And in that sense,
So you're saying whatever is fundamental will be able to tell you exactly what's happening inside of a black hole.
well, or it will tell you that this whole framework in which black holes appear is the wrong framework.
And thusly, black holes are just a data structure for something else that is describable once you get outside
Once
of
you get out of
space-time.
And it's hard for us to think outside of space-time. Like,
Yeah, can we beat this point to death for a second? Because this one was a breakthrough for me. I always thought of the Planck length as like so infinitesimally small that like we should all be in awe. And you're like that space-time breaks down that early is just ridiculous. And I was like, okay, that's a different frame of reference.
yeah, it's a very shallow data structure. If it was 10 to the minus 33 trillion centimeters that it broke down, I'd be impressed. 10 to the minus 33. We got cheated. This is a really shallow data structure. It's only 4 dimensions. I can't even imagine something in 5 dimensions. I can't even imagine a new color that I've never seen before. So we've been given this really, we think that we're, in many cases, we think we're the epitome of intelligence and the smartest thing in the universe. My feeling is we've been shortchanged. Really shallow data structure, only 3 dimensions of space, 1 dimension of time. We got a cheap headset.
And so that's a fun way to say it. When data breaks down like that,
Right.
I always forget the guy's name, so I wrote it down, but Nima Arkani Hamed.
Right.
I'm going to make a bold statement and say that doing a TEDx talk is going to be the most transformative and uplifting experience of your life and your business. This is Kevin. Before his TEDx talk, when I met him, he was 19 years old, had just dropped out of high school, was battling mental health issues, really hoped to one day write a book, and was an aspiring speaker. After helping him land his TEDx talk, he has now landed over 300 paid speaking engagements. He's landed a 6-figure book deal with the world's largest publisher. He's helped raise millions of dollars for mental health charities, and most importantly, he's living his full time. And this is Cynthia. Before she did her TEDx talk, when we got connected, she was a nurse practitioner and a health coach, just trying to build credibility in her space, but she couldn't really break through to the next level in her business. After her TEDx talk, her client list went to a year long because so many people were trying to work with her. Her social media exploded. She landed a 6-figure speaking contract globally. She landed a book deal. And most importantly, she was able to impact exponentially more people than she was able to impact before. I could keep going, but the point is a TEDx talk has the ability to transform your life, your business, and your impact. Now, I don't work for sponsored, affiliated, or endorsed by them. I simply know this because I've done 4 TEDx talks myself, and those TEDx talks led to raising over $5 million to build schools, libraries, and water projects.
So I've heard you talk about him a lot, so I started doing some research on him. And if I'm understanding what he's saying correctly, is basically when you have a data structure that early, right, which was, again, a total reframe for me, because I thought of that as like, oh my God. But apparently, when you understand this better, you realize that's a pretty early tap out. Right. So when a data structure falls apart that early, that tells you that it's proximal, right, which I'm interpreting as it's the finger pointing at the moon. It is not the moon itself.
Exactly.
And so now you're looking at a pointer. And so that seems to be the thing that his whole case rests on for space-time being doomed. That if your data structure that early, there's no way this is the fundamental thing.
That's one of the big pointers. One of the other big pointers he gives is that when you let go of space-time and you start computing particle interactions, like 2 gluons hit each other and 4 gluons go spraying, that kind of thing that happens at the Large Hadron Collider all the time. If you compute it inside of space-time, that one I mentioned, 2 gluons in, 4 gluons out, hundreds of pages of algebra for one interaction. Why is it so complicated? Because it's the wrong data structure. It's an ugly, nasty data structure.
And the thing that you're doing the algebra on is in what way they scatter.
Inside space-time. You have to make all the math work out, you have to have these Feynman diagrams with virtual particles.
People are they're trying to say, okay, a theory of everything, right, which you are saying does not exist and will never exist, right? We'll get to that later.
Yeah, right.
So if there were a theory of everything, though, we should be able to know everything so finely that I can tell you, oh, if they collide at this energy with this directionality, it will scatter exactly like this.
Yeah, with these probabilities, you have probabilities of their scattering.
Okay, right. And so they're just like, oh my God, it's a dizzying amount of math.
That's right. If you do it until you let go of space-time, and then that one that I mentioned, 2 gluons in, 4 gluons out, it's one term. You can compute it by hand.
It's like when they hit, there'll be a diamond.
Yeah,
because you need to start talking in shapes, right?
Well, yeah. So it's a shape beyond space-time whose volumes. So yeah, it's a shape outside of space-time, outside of our headset, and the volumes of this shape actually tell you the probabilities of the various kinds of particle interactions.
Okay, so
it turns billions of terms into a handful of terms, and it shows you new symmetries. That's what the physicists really love. It's simpler math, which is great, and then all of a sudden you see new symmetries that you can't see in space-time.
I'm going to try to draw an analogy, which is already going to break things, but let me see how close I get. You're in Grand Theft Auto,
right?
You step on the gas and you go forward, and we're just like, oh my God, the math to predict in what way the car is going to move when you step on the gas pedal is ridiculous. But if we were to be actually looking at an electrical pattern that's stepping on the gas, which would be pressing buttons on your controller in a certain context, if we understood that there's a pattern outside of the headset, so in the PlayStation or the Xbox, there's an electrical pattern inside of that looks, so if you know chess, and I don't, but I'm familiar with the idea of chunking. So apparently what chess masters do is they're not looking at the individuals on the board, they just know the patterns. So they're like, oh, that edge of where the pieces are in this order, that's this setup. So they've chunked the whole board into like, oh, I know where we're at in the game and I know what the right next move is. So basically what you're saying is you step on the gas and it gives you an image of a shape of electrical patterns outside of the headset. If that's what you're saying, I at least understand. I could not give you the math or any of that, but I get like this representation, this data structure, which you think of as being real, stepping on the gas and the red Porsche goes, is actually this chunk of electrical impulses, if we think of a shape or a pattern or a rhythm or however we're going to think of it. Is that what we're saying?
That could be a helpful metaphor. And I've got another metaphor that may also try to help people on this, because that's an important point that you're raising. So suppose, here's another way to think about this. Suppose that I'm looking at a video and I'm seeing all these pixels, and the pixels are moving in really complicated ways. You know, there's the red, dark, and I'm just, and I know that there's something interesting going on. And so I write down all these equations of these pixels, and but someone says, you know what? There is just this little Rubik's cube, and all I'm doing is rotating a Rubik's cube, and but you're only seeing the pixel projection of. If you just could see this 3D object, you would realize how simple it is. But when you only see the pixels and see all the, then it's, oh man, I've got to model all the pixels moving on my screen. How do I do that? Well, if you can just let go of the screen, behind it there's this unified geometric object, the Rubik's cube. And if you just see, oh, it just rotates rigidly, and that rigid rotation is the only motion I need. It's a rotation. Here I have to look at all the pixels. And this pixel
So
moving
I'm
this
paying
way.
attention to the dots rather
Paying
than the shape.
Space-time is
That's
paying
way
attention
better
to
than
the
my
dots. Right. So in space-time, we're stuck on the video screen, and we're trying to model all the pixels moving around the video screen. And what the physicists have said, if you let go of the video screen, take it off, you see that these geometric objects like that Rubik's Cube are outside of it, and their structure is much simpler. Now, I'm not saying simple, but much simpler. But when it projects into this really, see, you lost information in the projection, right? That's why you have all these little pixels. You have a 3D object here, a two-dimensional screen. So you've lost. So now it looks really complicated. But
So what's happening then when these things collide? They're making a new Rubik's Cube? Or they're just rotating a shape that's already there? This is where I have no way to anchor myself.
Well, so particles are things inside space-time, right?
Yes.
So when we look at particle interactions at the Large Hadron Collider, we're looking at the pixels, the motions of the pixels inside space-time. The amplituhedron and other structures that they're finding.
Okay, amplituhedron is something you say so fast. I've heard you say this a gazillion times, but I had to look it up.
Oh, right.
So an amplituhedron is a shape.
Yes.
A geometric shape.
Right.
In how many dimensions?
They can be in small numbers dimensions, but they can go to infinity. So there's different kinds of different sizes of amplituhedra depending on how many particles you want to interact.
And that's our Rubik's Cube.
That would be the Rubik's Cube beyond the headset.
Yep.
And by the way, this is brand new. This was published in 2013. This is not even 10 years old. So this is all new stuff, this amplituhedron. So it's no surprise that people haven't heard of it, and many physicists haven't heard of it. It's truly remarkable. Quantum theorists, in fact.
And so what makes people think the amplituhedron is actually real? That we have detected the shape outside of the headset?
Well, I think that the really brilliant physicists would not say we're done. They would say we've taken a first step outside of the headset of space-time, and one of the first structures we found is the amplituhedron. That doesn't mean it's going to be the final answer. They're looking at other structures, something called the cosmological polytope and surface hedra and so forth.
Cosmological polytrope?
Polytope.
Polytope. What is that?
That
is another geometric shape.
It's another geometric shape that Nima, Arkani Hamed, Juan Maldacena, and others. A lot of the work's been done at the Institute for Advanced Study and collaborators with the people there. And this is trying. See, the amplituhedron is primarily for flat space-time, in my understanding. So without gravity. But when you deal with gravity, and Einstein told us that sort of curves space-time, then things get a little more complicated. And in that case, I think they're looking at the cosmological polytope for more like cosmological kinds of predictions. So the amplitude-hedron, and I'm sure that they're saying that they're not saying that cosmological polytope is the final word. What's really interesting is they've already beyond the amplitude-hedron.
Getting out of body can actually be quite easy if you follow a science-based system. You might be a truth seeker searching for knowledge of who you are and want to explore the universe. Maybe you want to meet with your spirit guides or develop spiritually. Perhaps you want to heal yourself or reconnect with someone that you love that has passed away. Well, the good news is all of that is possible, and you've come to the right place. My name is Florentine Ionita, and I've been helping hundreds of people succeed with astral projection by using a proven system based on science. I've been featured in many podcasts and magazines such as Evidence of the Afterlife and Mystic Mag, as well as a documentary done by Vice journalists. When I started with astral projection, I had no idea what it was or how to do it. And to be honest, I was even skeptical if it was even real or just people's imagination. After spending years learning it, practicing it, researching it, and even teaching it, I now not only know that it's real, but I also know exactly how it works and what you have to do in order to get a body consistent. It really comes down to three major things. One, you need to use a system based on science that has a proven track record. Two, you need what I call training wheels, which are special technologies that help you stay awake and guide you into the right state of consciousness. And three, you need to overcome some.
So there's something called,
Meaning even that they don't think is fundamental, or just that it's part of the fundamental.
they think it's an important step outside of space-time, but what surprises the physicists is that the heart of the amplitude-hedron is something called a permutation, a kind of permutation called a decorated permutation. It's like shuffling cards, you're permuting cards. So it's a surprise that if you let go of space-time, things become simple. You get this amplitude-hedron, the math becomes simple, and then when you look at the math about its essential character, you find out that behind the amplitude-hedron is just permutations, decorated permutations, shuffling cards kind of thing. And so we're at this position. So this is only, in the last couple decades, right, that this has happened. The amplitude-hedron is 2013, so it's only 9 years old. So here we're at this really interesting position in science, in physics. I like to think of it like the movie 2001, A Space Odyssey. Remember, and there's a scene where there's the monolith. It's just sitting there, pregnant with meaning. And the apes are looking at it. They're afraid of it. They're beating on it. They don't know what to do with it. You get the sense that they know it's important, but they haven't a clue what it's pointing to. That's where we are. The amplitude-hedron and the decorated permutations are these monsters outside of space-time. There's no dynamics. Who ordered this monolith, the amplitude-hedron, just sitting outside of space-time? It captures all these amplitudes, all the particle amplitudes. It captures the structure of space-time. Einstein's special relativity, quantum theory, and his so-called unitarity of quantum theory. So this is deeper. This thing is deeper than space-time. It's deeper than quantum theory. Quantum theory itself is not deep enough. This structure, the amplitude-hedron, this monolith, is beyond quantum theory, but it codes for quantum theory as projection in space-time. So who ordered this? Like just in 2001, A Space Odyssey, the apes, you can imagine, what is this? Where did it come from? Why? What's it going on? We don't know.
I can imagine me asking that.
Yeah. Well, everybody's asking it right now. It's just a static structure. Physicists like dynamics. We want to have equations of motion. We don't have that. We just have, here's the geometry, and here's behind it this permutation. They're just sitting there. Who ordered that and why? So that's where, but the attitude is not one of despair. This is really for the young geniuses who are doing this stuff. This is like fabulous, right? We're the first generation, not me, but the young physicists, the first generation that really gets to step outside of the headset of space-time. They've already found these monoliths, the amplitude-hedron, decorated permutations.
And just to really make that simplistic, shapes
shapes.
And then the shuffling of the shapes.
Yes, that's right. Some shuffling that codes for the shapes. There's a shuffling
that when you say codes for the shapes, what does that mean?
It captures their essential structure. In some sense, even the geometry, the volumes and so forth, are redundant. There's this even simpler, more compressed description. Right now, the decorated permutation is the most compressed description that doesn't have any extra bells and whistles. The amplitude-hedron, in some sense, the positive gross line that they used to build it and so forth, they have extra bells and whistles. In some sense, the amplitude-hedron boils it down to its essence. So it's shuffles, permutations, and the big question is why this? I mean, if you in the beginning God said, why would God say that? What is this?
Let there be shapes.
Let there be the amplitude-hedron. Let there be shuffles. That doesn't seem quite deep enough, right? It seems like there's got to be something beyond that, something dynamic. And there's no clue right now in the physics about a dynamical thing behind the decorated permutations or the amplitude-hedron.
Well, we just lost me. That we lost a lot of people. So this is outside of the headset. So we're beginning to get to what we think may be these foundational pillars, but it's so early that nobody really knows what these are yet.
Right.
Let's go back to the quantum realm for a second.
Right.
So this is one of my pet peeves, that people in the mindset space tend towards something about quantum entanglement, the quantum tubules in the brain, or whatever it is that they think about collapsing and all that. One, is there anything, even inside the headset, is there anything to be learned from the quantum realm? Does the quantum realm point to anything outside of the headset? And
I'm completely shocked after watching this interview to see a scientist finally
A lot of ads,
it's utterly
guys. Sorry about that.
astonishing.
What you will hear.
like, how do people not drift into meaninglessness as they begin to pursue this? Because because I'm so focused on usefulness,
right,
I get very agitated, might be the right, like, oh, we're quantum entangled and that's what the soul is, and I want to tear my hair out.
Right. So it's one thing just to say those words. It's another thing to have a mathematical model. And a mathematical model that actually predicts precise outcomes of precise experiments. And so that's the difference. When physicists talk about quantum entanglement, they're talking serious math and the serious experiments that just a week ago, the Nobel Prize was awarded to 3 of the pioneers in testing one of the key predictions of entanglement.
Which is that the real isn't real.
So yeah, it's called local realism. The belief that we tend to have of local realism. So objects like an electron has a property like its position or its spin. Whether or not you observe it, it's got a value of that because it's real. And
we assume
we've assumed that, right? That's the reality.
Whether you see it or not, it is spinning up or spinning down.
That's right. It's like saying the train is there and it's going to hit you even if you don't see it. You close your eyes, it's not going to stop the train from hitting you. So the electron really has its position and really has a spin when it's not observed. And the other assumption is locality. It's Einstein's assumption that no effects travel faster than the speed of light through space, through space-time. And so that the two together are called local realism. So it's possible that when we say local realism is false, that it's either the realism that's wrong or the locality. So it could be, you could say, okay, local realism is false because there really are properties that exist, but they travel, their influences go faster than the speed of light. Or you can say nothing travels faster than the speed of light, but the realism is false. I believe Einstein, but the realism is false. My attitude is both are false. Local and realism are both false. And that comes out of just the idea that space-time itself is not fundamental, right?
And so let me say it real simply for people like me. Things only exist when you look at them.
Right. You create them when you see them. Like in Grand Theft Auto, I have a VR headset on. I look over there and I see a red Camaro. Is there a red Camaro in the supercomputer? No.
The average person is going to reject this out of hand.
Right.
So, one, we're going to have to walk through the Nobel Prize. So thankfully you had linked to an article, so I read about it. It melted my brain about an hour before you and I sat down together. Or true, I guess, because it's not real. And then, so we'll walk through that. But to give people the analogy to anchor them, I think you and I disagree about this. And I've always told people, largely because I don't want to argue about it and I don't really know, that I don't think we live in a simulation. The more times I interview you, the more I'm like, maybe we do, or maybe the way our fitness payoffs get mapped, it is so effectively like a simulation as you might as well think of it as living in a simulation. So I've written this story with my team. I don't want to overly take credit, but we've created this thing called Project Kaizen. And in Project Kaizen, they're in this thing that we call the array. The array is basically quantum foam, and the idea is that it's information theory. So that information can travel faster than the speed of light, and that ultimately the thing that drives people mad in our world is to ask the question, where is the array? Because they're thinking of it as like a computer or something, but lore where we play with that question. I don't want to give away what we think is the right answer, but we play with that question a lot. And so one of the characters in the story is literally driving himself mad by asking the question, where is the array? I know if I can generate enough energy, I can rip this veil and I can see through beyond the headset into like, is this sitting on a desk somewhere? And like, can we actually discover where that is? And okay, so working with that idea, at first I thought, nah, I mean, this is all just a story. But the more that I look at this, this is in real life, put that in air quotes. In real life, you only render things when the player is looking at it. It's the only way to not melt the computer. Right. So as they move their characters' eyes around, they see different parts of the world. It literally comes into existence. It gets rendered when they look at it, and it ceases to be rendered when they look away. So they feel like they're in the seamless 3D environment, but in reality, it's a trick. And so it's only rendering right up to the edge of your field of view, and then outside of that, it's gone.
Exactly. Yeah.
As you described the math, that is what's really happening, right? I mean, it's kind of fun and cool and interesting.
Right.
Okay, so with that analogy, you understand that one,
I agree.
What's the difference between a child that gets into a top tier school versus a lower tier school? Trust me, it's not what you think. Hey everyone, I'm Kevin Hong, and for the last 10 plus years, we've worked with over 800 families to help get their students into the university they deserve so that their child can have the best future possible. In the last admission cycle, over 50% of our students got accepted into a top 25 university with an average acceptance of 9.3%. Universities like Stanford, Harvard, Columbia, MIT, UC Berkeley, University of Michigan, and Duke. And right now, I want to go over one of the most important and hidden admissions criteria that is even approved by universities themselves that will give your 6th to 12th grader a huge advantage when they apply to college. To understand this hidden criteria, you must remember that all universities are exactly like businesses, even the public ones. And a university is one of the hardest businesses to run. Each year, they have tons of guaranteed expenses, such as buildings, maintenance, and professor salaries. So making sure that every year they have customers who are willing to pay their high fees is extremely critical to not having budget troubles. So the hidden admissions criteria that they never state is that they're looking for students who will go on to have a successful career and not just stay a successful student. Why is that the case? Well, universities are smart and clearly understand that their customers, you, will pretty much pick the best and most prestigious university they get into.
Sorry, guys.
Your child gets into Harvard versus...
If you try to replicate, so going back to what I was If I try to replicate this table and make it look photorealistic, it is unbelievably difficult. And there are so many elements of like reflectivity and depth of how far the light penetrates and
Absolutely.
oh my God, and it on and on and on.
Right, absolutely.
The truth is hitting your career goals is not easy. You have to be willing to go the extra mile to stand out and do hard things better than anybody else.
You know,
But
you can
there
kind
are
of
10
tell when you're
steps I want to
getting
take you through
to
that will
some good
100x your
information because they
efficiency
start
so you
throwing
can
all
crush your
the
goals and
ads in
get
on
back
you.
more time
So
into
let's
your
just
day.
get
You'll
through it.
not only get
Give
control
me a
of your
second.
time,
This
you'll
will
learn
be
how to use that momentum to take on
be
your
over
next big
just a
goal. To
second.
help you do this,
We've
I've
got
created a list of
about,
the 10 most
let's
impactful
see,
things that any high achiever needs to dominate. And you can download it for
maybe
free
like
by
2
clicking the
hours.
link in today's description.
No,
All right, my
got about
friend,
an hour
back
left.
to today's
So we're
episode.
just going to kind of
So
climb
we
through
know
these ads. We'll
My
get through
understanding
them.
stops right
But
here.
I'm not
Finding a
going to
probability
let
measure,
this
because
information escape
if
my
I could
brain.
tell you how it worked, then I tell you how it worked. Right now, I can just say, here's the probabilities. And so that's what we get in quantum theory is, and so that's why Einstein said, God doesn't play dice. He didn't like the idea that God didn't know all the way down what was going on, that there would be these random probabilities. But yeah, when you do the experiments, it turns out entanglement is real. And that then leads to the conclusion ultimately that local realism is false. And it's truly stunning. But if you think about it in terms of a headset, as you said, I render, like in the virtual reality Grand Theft Auto, I render the Camaro when I look, and I garbage collect it when I look away. I just delete it. I render particles, I render space-time itself. Space-time itself doesn't exist except as a data structure that we use. And so it's, now in terms of a simulation, I should make a distinction between what we're saying here and a different kind of notion of simulation that Nick Bostrom has. So there's a simulation theory of Nick Bostrom and others where they say, look, this isn't real. It could be just some computer geek that did a program, and we're just creatures in the simulated world in this program. And it turns out that computer geek herself is just a program from someone else at a lower level. And there's this whole hierarchy all the way down until you get to some base programmer. But they assume that the base level is a space-time world. So they're still stuck on the headset. That kind of simulation theory isn't thinking big enough. You have to let and they're also assuming that programs can create consciousness, which is another story. No one's been able to show how that's even possible. So they're just not thinking big enough. You've got to let go of space-time at the base of the entire hierarchy of simulations to really get where the physicists have gotten. Space-time itself is merely a headset. So the standard simulation theory isn't thinking big enough. It's still stuck in the headset.
As we strip away the headset, is local realism going to remain false, or will there be something, a better way to ask it, when we strip away the headset, is God still playing dice?
I'll put it this way. As scientists making theories, we will always come up short. We will always have a place where we say in our theory, this is where our knowledge stops. And that's what we call the assumptions of our theory. So every scientific theory says, if you grant me these assumptions, I'll explain all this wonderful stuff. But you have to grant me those assumptions. And I can't explain those assumptions. Like even Einstein, he said, grant me that the speed of light is constant for all observers, and grant me that the laws of physics are the same for all people moving in uniform motion. If you grant me those two things, then I can do all this wonderful stuff. And that's the way all scientific theories work. Grant me this assumption, these miracles.
Because we don't yet understand these things.
Well, and it's also, I think, intrinsic to what it means to be a scientific theory.
You feel it deep in your bones. You were born to help others become their best selves, to facilitate growth and inspire greatness, to be a change maker. There's a life coach in you. You just know it. But something is holding you back. What if you're wrong? Maybe you aren't fully ready to step into that version of yourself yet. Maybe someday. Well, let me give you some clarity here. There are 5 important questions you should ask yourself before starting your coaching journey. They will help you understand if coaching is the right path for you. I reveal what these 5 things are in my new virtual masterclass. You might discover you're a natural born coach after all. And if you are, I'll tell you everything you need to know to get started as a life coach today. Click the link now. I'll see you in the masterclass.
The company that helps your YouTube videos go viral using Google Ads, which helps you get noticed in Google search, which, by the way, is the first reason why you should use vFly to promote your YouTube videos. They have big numbers with millions of views delivered and many thousands of campaigns and happy clients and growing. No. These numbers are fake. vFly is a scam. Okay, fine. Let's go to scamadvisor.com and test things out. So we all know that Facebook is a legit site. We also know that Twitter is not a scam. So what happens if we type in vFly's website? So it turns out that vFly is trustworthy. What? Scam Advisor sees vFly as safe and has lots of traffic. Their SSL certificate is valid and mostly positive reviews. The negative highlight is that the owner doesn't want to reveal himself, but what is revealed is plenty of facts about vFly that you could read about yourself, like who's in the organization, all their website data, and other info you might want to know about. So reason 3, they're legit. Reason number 4, vFly is against using bots, and they help you get real people engaged in your content. Reason number 4, easy to promote a video. Click promote a video and paste your YouTube video link right here. How you do that, pick a video you want to promote. In this case, I'll pick my video with 632 views. Click it and click on the word share. Click copy to copy the link. Go back to vFly dashboard, right click on your mouse right there and paste your link like this. Click promote now, and there's the link we just pasted. Besides views, they can help you get more subscribers, likes, comments, website.
So there's no escaping this. A scientific theory. There is no theory of everything.
If the ads keep up
That's a
like
flat-out
this, I'm
statement.
gonna stop it.
There
But
can never
I
be a
know when they
scientific
start
theory of
showing
everything.
ads, that's when it starts to get good. So
Gödel's
I'm
incompleteness
just hanging
theorem,
here
but
with
even
you.
just before Gödel's incompleteness
You know?
theorem, every theory says grant me these assumptions, please. You have to make certain assumptions to even to boot up.
But isn't that just our ignorance?
Probably so, but our ignorance is unlimited.
It's interesting. So I heard you and Yoshabach, discussing, and he said something that rings intuitively true to me, which is that we always want to say, "Oh, we'll never understand that," right? But we just don't understand it right now. And just like Newton and his whole thing at the end of his life, where he was like, "The right way to think of me is as a child on the shore playing with a seashell in front of the entire vast sea of undiscovered truth."
Right.
And his students, though, didn't believe that. Now, maybe out of arrogance, maybe that just sat so icky with them to think that they were so ignorant to so many things. But also, to be generous to them, maybe because they believed on a long enough timeline we really would figure things out. Or even if you'll grant me my miracle of, as we begin to merge with machines, will we be able to process data in such a more vast way that we're able to see what is true. All of the combinatorial combinations become manageable just because we can crunch so much data. Oh, you might as well look at what is exactly real. So with that setup, I finally just went and looked up Gödel's incompleteness theorem, because I've tried to hang with you every episode around this. And looking at it, it's basically that there are, and this will be the world's most simplistic interpretation, but there are, you can create an equation that you know to be true, but you can't prove it.
Right.
And it's beyond me to be able to explain how that's true, but when you read about it, it's like, whoa, okay, so you can really create, it's kind of like the mathematical version of a linguistic trap, where it's like the statement on this side of the card or the statement on the other side of the card is false. You turn it over and it says, well, the statement on the other side of the card is true. And so now you're trapped because they can't both be right or wrong.
Right.
So I can't explain it better than that. But like without that, if there isn't things that are, if he's right and there are things that are true but that cannot be proven, I get why you say that we'll never have a theory of everything. But if we just don't understand enough yet, then it feels like we will eventually.
No, Gödel's incompleteness theorem is definitive. It says that no matter how complicated your mathematical or scientific theory is. You can always produce a new statement that's true and is not provable within the theory that you got. So it means it escaped your current theory. Your theory was not a theory of everything because it wasn't a theory of this. It didn't capture this truth. So you didn't have a theory of everything. So you say, okay, well, I'll just put it in my theory. So now I've got, then Gödel says, well, sorry, now with your new augmented system, here's this new, I'll use it too. There's this new thing that's true, but can't be proven. So you don't have a theory of everything. And you add that, and what that means is that there is this unlimited realm of truth that's forever beyond our notion of proof, of scientific theory. It's unlimited. So there's this, I think of it as like unlimited intelligence, and that's out there, and our scientific theories will get huge and far more interesting and far more complex and cover lots and lots. They'll cover, we'll be blown away. We'll make lots and lots of progress. But Gödel's incompleteness theorem says, but you will have not even begun to scratch the surface of the unlimited intelligence that's out there. So I'm not, by the way, some people say, well, Hoffman, you've walked away from modernism and the desire for logic and truth and rationality. You've gone into postmodernism and you know, and my attitude is no. Reason is telling us its limits. Reason is saying that logic itself cannot get to all truths. So I'm paying due respect to reason, because reason itself is saying its own limits. And in fact, that gives me even more respect for reason, because reason is smart enough to tell us where it gets off. So it's not abandoning reason. It's not going into, you know, some postmodernism kind of thing where anything goes. No, not anything goes. Reason is saying, yeah, use your logical systems, but your logical systems must, of course, be internally consistent. So Gödel's theorem is not Gödel's inconsistency theorem, it's Gödel's incompleteness theorem. Our logic can be consistent. If it is consistent, then it's necessarily incomplete. If it were inconsistent, then it's mostly useless, right? It'd be mostly useless. So what Gödel really showed is our theories are either inconsistent or incomplete. But we call it Gödel's incompleteness theorem because we don't think about inconsistency. It's really the incompleteness. And so it's truly respecting reason to recognize that reason itself says where it gets off. And it points to, as Newton pointed, to this unbounded intelligence that reason can always happily explore, fully knowing it will always be a trivial foray into the unknown. A trivial foray into the unknown. And yet somehow it's important for us to do that foray. So as a scientist, this is not just abstract stuff for me.
Have you ever gone through a messy life experience, and then when you come out on the other side, you feel empowered, like you hated it while you were empowered, and you knew you could help people on another level if you shared that, right? Or how about a skill that you've mastered over the years doing over, you take for granted that you're really good at it? How about a passion that you could literally talk to somebody for hours, maybe going vegan or kayaking or something that really fills your heart that you could help somebody go quicker? Hey, it's Dean Graziosi. And if you've ever thought about sharing that information, get paid for what you know, creating a course or maybe a coaching program, then I'd love to invite you to a free, probably about 90-minute workshop where I'm going to give you the opportunity to work with Tony Robbins and myself to help you accomplish it. But either way, you're going to learn so much on how to enter one of the fastest growing industries in the world, to sell your mess that can become your message or your hobby or your passion or your skill or your expertise to allow other people to go faster. Here's the thing. In that 45 minutes, you're going to identify the problem that you could solve, the goal you could help them achieve. You're going to understand the why behind you should be doing this. You're going to understand how to dial in the marketing, because there's people already looking for what you have, and then show you how to launch that course or launch your coaching program. I'd love for you to join us this Thursday for the Time to Thrive workshop. It's not kind of free, it's totally free. All you got to do is click the link below and say yes. Listen, I know the world is shifting. I know the economy is shifting. I know this is a scary time. I know there's a lot of people promising you can get rich for doing nothing. Listen, these are crazy, uncertain times, but there is no way to get rich without doing anything. But there is the opportunity to sell what you know, enter an industry heading towards $1 trillion a year, and learn for myself. I've been doing this for over 25 years, and my partner, Tony Robbins, 45 years. Come join the workshop. It's not kind of free. It's totally free. You can't do this forever. You'll learn a ton, and we'd love the opportunity to earn the chance to work together to show you how to make this real. Click below, join the workshop, and there's a big surprise waiting for you once you do.
Is your wife your biggest? It's like she has a problem with it. And look, I get it. You deal with problems all day long in your business, and you don't want to come home with a whole new list of problems to deal with. And if this is relatable, let me show you how you can fix this problem in your marriage without sacrificing your successful business or career. Hey, my name's Tim Arrigo, and I'm the founder of Beyond Driven. We're a company that's focused on helping high-achieving men create the same level of success in their marriage that they've experienced in their business or their career. And look, dude, I don't know anything about you, but I do know that if you're watching this video right now, I'm probably interrupting whatever other video you were watching. And I also know that you didn't experience the level of success you've had in your life thus far by beating around the bush. So let me just get straight to the point and tell you the truth that no one else wants to tell you. The reason you've experienced so much success problems that you're having in your marriage, the drive, the aggression, the problem-solving attitude that you have, are all you have the income that you do. But ultimately, what I found after working with thousands of men and going through over 2,000 hours of clinical practice with cognitive behavioral therapy is that these superpowers you use in your world of business are also the cross you die on in your marriage. You can just power through most of the problems you experience in your line of work. That's how you get things done. But that doesn't work with your marriage. And I guarantee you that if your wife is constantly arguing with you, if you're non-existent and you're only having sex every blue moon, if it feels like your wife never recognizes what you do or how much you provide for her and your family, it's because you're bringing that same power through mentality from your business into your marriage. And changing this is the only thing that's going to fix the root of the issue that you're experiencing. A different version of you has to show up in your marriage with your wife. Otherwise, you're going to continue to feed the same exact problems you're experiencing now. It's either going to lead to a divorce, her cheating on you, or you having to continue to lie to the outside world that you're a success, when in reality, the only success that you really have is financial. And trust me, you can have a successful marriage and a successful career or business. But you have to understand how to downshift. It's like the gears of a car towards a more emotionally present and calm version of yourself that doesn't just power through the problems that you have with your wife. And like a lot of high performers I talk to, you may not understand how to do this or what downshifting looks like. And that's why I went ahead and put together a free training for you called the Inside Out Method. And I guarantee you the methodology I cover in this video is going to be way more valuable than whatever you're watching right now. There's a link somewhere on this video. Click the link and check out the video. You're going to understand how to get in control and get rid of the problems you're experiencing in your marriage. It starts with you. You can continue to point the finger at your wife. You can continue to blame her for all the problems that you're having, or you can take ownership of the situation and lead like a man to fix it. So go ahead and click the button, and I'll see you on that free training.
I take reason very seriously. It says, I have limits, and there are unbounded truths beyond reason. So I take time to just sit in complete silence and let go of reason and see what happens. Maybe I can touch that unlimited intelligence. Maybe I am that unlimited intelligence under a headset. That's an interesting possibility, which many spiritual traditions have pointed to, that we are that unlimited intelligence, so that we then have this interesting back and forth between rigorous logic, not anything goes, rigorous logic on the one hand, where there's this incredible intelligence it's literally infinitely greater than our scientific intelligence. Really hard-nosed in your math and your complete interior silence to get the truth to this unlimited wisdom, unlimited intelligence, and go back and forth. Somehow, my feeling is that's what all this is pointing to, that we should have our feet in both realms. and for some reason, having is really what we're up to.
Never been enamored with the consciousness debate,
Mhm.
but the way that you propose some ways of looking at it, I do find intriguing. So you've got this idea that incompleteness theorem says that it's this infinite thing.
All right, guys, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up there. That was a pretty interesting discussion. It's deep, and it gives you something to think about. It's just another perspective